Hello, everybody. Welcome to the CISO Corner, episode 14. I'm Dane Dittemore with DataBank, joined by our Chief Information Security Officer, Mark Houpt.
Hey, Dane, how you doing? This is only episode 14. I really wish we had like 140. How's that? Can we do that real quick?
Yeah, well, we'll make sure that happens.
All right.
Well, today's topic is trends in data security and privacy, a whole new ballgame. Now, Mark, do you ever wonder where that expression came from?
I often wonder, but I'm betting. You know what? I think it pertains to our favorite pastime that we're getting ready to go into the playoffs with would be Major League Baseball. And I'll bet it even comes from back in the 1930s because that's when all the good things from Major League Baseball happened.
Wow, you really are a wealth of information.
Hey, you got to try, right?
That's right. You probably Googled it before joining the meeting, right?
Yes, I Googled it before joining the meeting. I knew it was Major League Baseball, but I had to Google the 1930s part. I have to admit that part, right?
Well, great. That means you're prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. Would never come in unprepared.
Right. Well, that's who we are, right? We are in that business. So let's talk about trends in data security and privacy. As I was reviewing your previous podcast, I noted a couple. One is that it's not a matter of whether someone will try to attack your data, it's a matter of when.
Yep, no question about it, Dane. It's only a matter of when, and then it's a matter of whether they'll get through or not. So, if you think you're not on the radar right now, someone from somewhere has got your number, and someone with ill intent is going to be trying to deceive you. They're going to try to attack you, something along those lines. I was sitting in a meeting about a year ago, about 10 months ago, with some folks out in Virginia. And it was a sales meeting, and we were talking about this very subject. And one of the questions that was presented to me is, well, if I want to be able to be a better salesperson, how can I demonstrate that security is important? And I said, you can show the attacks that are coming into the company. And one of the other people stood up and said, yeah, but what if they don't believe there's any attacks coming into the company? I said, oh, there's plenty of attacks coming into the company. We'll show you that. And that's really where it's at, is even if you are not a victim yet, you're definitely being attacked. You're being probed. You're being checked out, if you will, by the aliens in their UFOs that are trying to get into our networks all over. And of course, that's a little bit of a joke, but reality is that, the attacks are coming in all over the country, from all over the world.
Right. Well, and I think there's just, it's in the news every day. Right. So absolutely. I'm sure they're aware of it. Mm-hmm. Well, another trend I noted, especially in the context of what's going on in Eastern Europe, is that attackers aren't always or necessarily just coming from nation states, but also from unaligned entities, mm-hmm. kind of rogue groups that aren't nation states.
Yeah. So Dane, you accused me of doing my homework on Major League Baseball and the saying there from the 1930s. So I'm going to accuse you of doing your homework on this one as well. And you're absolutely correct in this type of scenario. In fact, most countries out there that do nation state attacks will not actually do them themselves. They will get proxies to do them on their behalf. And the reason for that is because a number of countries, the United States included, has declared that a cyber event, a cyber attack, especially against critical infrastructure, is considered no different than a kinetic attack. In other words, an attack like a Pearl Harbor or an attack like 9/11, where there's an actual explosion type of weapon that's being used. And ever since that's been declared by many countries that the cyber is equal to kinetic, there's been kind of a desire to create a standoff weapon, if you will. And that is working with various mobs out there, working with organized crime, working with people who are loosely organized in order to give them orders to attack on behalf of the nation state. It's what we call plausible deniability. So it's out there, and it is happening.
What other trends are you and your team seeing, and what can business and IT leaders do about these?
Well, there's a lot of trends going on in security right now. So we just talked about one where, let's dive deeper on that just a little bit with ransomware, for example. Years ago, ransomware used to be, hey, let's attack, let's get the money, and let's run kind of thing. And in response, a lot of the attackers would actually give you your encryption keys, and you get your data back if you paid the money. Well, in recent couple of years, and in particular this year, there's been a lot of disruption going on within the ransomware community. There was one major ransomware group that had been, loosely aligned, like I talked about a moment ago, that for various reasons, including legal reasons, believe it or not, disbanded and basically took all their toys, and each individual person that was a member of that group either went their own way and created their own groups, or became aligned with other groups. So that occurred in late 21, so November, December, early January timeframe of 21 and 22. And so we actually saw a dip in ransomware activity occurring, but then it's now started coming back up because these people that were once aligned or with one group are now aligned with another one. So they're getting ramped back up, and then there's new groups that are forming as well. So that's one trend that kind of ties back to what we were talking about. But probably the biggest trends overall in business security and compliance and such that we're seeing right now is I almost call it the attack of the governments, because there is a huge move right now on the part of government entities, especially in the United States, to create new privacy laws and create other new security regulations. Some of this is legitimate in response to the fact that business hasn't been well regulating themselves and therefore causing outages. And an example of that would be a certain pipeline situation in the southeast of the United States that occurred a couple of years ago, where they were attacked by ransomware, but it was a preventable type of situation, arguably. And in response, the US federal government has said, through Department of Homeland Security and CISA, has said, hey, we now are requiring all of our critical infrastructure environments to meet certain standards and report on those standards. And then conversely, we have over half of the states in the United States now either considering or actually implementing laws regarding consumer privacy. So California Consumer Privacy Act was the leader in that. And since then you had Virginia, which inside of their legal mindset and thought processes of their legislature says whatever California does, not just on this topic, but other topics as well, whatever California does, we're going to do. Colorado has enacted some new privacy laws. Illinois has some privacy laws in place, and that they're reinforcing and now using law enforcement to enforce regarding biometric recording of biometric data and the protection of that. And then, like I said, there's somewhere around 26 to 28, depending on the day you're looking at it, different states across the union that have active or semi-active laws within their state legislatures in order to enact more privacy legislation. And then again, coming back to the federal government, there is a considerable amount of talk at the federal government level about just overriding all of those state laws with a federal government privacy law. And in return, of course, people like California, Virginia have stepped up and said, you can't override my laws. And so there's this whole thing that's brewing on the regulatory side in regards to compliance and security that's out there that we have to deal with as well.
Wow. Well, so unpack that just a little bit. So it sounds like it's kind of the typical situation between state and federal.
Yes.
Right.
Well, in the United States, yes, we have that unique situation that's occurred for getting close to 250 years now, where the state versus federal type of scenario exists. And anytime a federal law tries to trump a state law, most states will push back and say, stay off my lawn kind of thing. And that's right. especially with California. One of the reasons, well, two of the reasons that California has been that way is because they don't believe that the US federal laws will be as stringent, number one. And number two, there's a real serious movement overall inside of California, not towards independence from the United States. Don't get me wrong when I say that, but independence in legislation in general. You know, California has led our country in electric use of electric vehicles and environmental issues, and now with the CCPA, they've led our country in the use of privacy regulations as well. And so there's a lot of efforts on the part of the California legislature to really plant their flag and say, hey, we're California and we're going to write our own laws and we're going to live our own way and do this in the way that we see best. And we don't want interference from others.
So this has particular implications in terms of additional regulations and therefore cost in terms of companies complying not only with federal, but state regulatory environments.
Right. And so a challenge that I have as a leader is that if California, Colorado, Virginia, and 26 other states have independent laws instead of one, I've got almost 30 laws that I have to pay attention to and make sure that in this particular situation that law governs, that I have to maintain compliance with it. And what that does is that requires probably not necessarily more security tools, because we've got a lot of security tools in place now, but it certainly requires more staff or some not protective tools, but more discovery tools type of things in order to prove our regulatory compliance. And then we have to have auditors that will come in and do that as well. So there's going to be it's going to be a point where you can't just get an SSAE 18 or an SSAE 20 and say, hey, we meet privacy regulation. It's going to be California. There's real talk about California saying, hey, you have to audit in accordance with our regulation, not some sort of blanket scenario. And so if that happens, I've already do 10 audits a year. Imagine having to do 30 audits a year just to meet each individual state's requirements. And that's a little bit, I understand that that's a little bit outlandish because we've never seen that happen in any other scenario. But even if I have to do 3 or 4 audits additional a year in order to meet California, Colorado, and Virginia and Illinois and so on and so forth, because they each talk about a different thing, that increases cost from a financial employee headcount perspective. It increases cost from a scenario of paying the auditors for the audits, not counting the time and effort that people have to put in to make sure that they're doing all the things that are being done.
Sure. Well, that's definitely something to keep an eye on, because obviously it falls back to potentially constricting growth,
right,
and scalability of companies, companies that care, and obviously that's probably more of the Fortune 500 ish sorts of companies,
right.
But you can't just have somebody that hangs out a shingle and wants to sell a bunch of stuff and scale quickly and not abide by any rules and regulations if they're selling goods and services in the state of California, for example, or however that's defined. So, hey, an increased attempt by federal agencies to regulate and define critical infrastructure. Talk to me a little bit about critical infrastructure, because I think now that we've seen natural resources, gas, solar, et cetera, we've seen kind of an energy crunch here, and partly due to geopolitical events, right? Talk to me a little bit about critical infrastructure and the federal government.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a challenge to talk to you about, because the federal government has not come out with a clear and consistent definition of what critical infrastructure is. Now, I'm sure they would think differently. They would say, oh, it's gas pipelines, it's about energy, it's about healthcare, it's about those telecommunication items, those things that are required as the very base foundation of our country in order for us to continue to do business continue to operate and so on and so forth. But the reason it's a little bit confusing is because it used to be pretty obvious. And those are the ones I just mentioned: energy, emergency healthcare, not necessarily just general healthcare, but emergency healthcare. And transportation from an interstate capability, so trains and trucks and even aircraft, for example, things along those lines used to be obvious. The things that the federal government regulated, we've got the FAA, we've got the National Transportation Safety Board, or those types of entities that regulate those pieces. Even agriculture, making sure that there's enough food in the food supply. But during the pandemic, the definition of what was considered a critical infrastructure item really changed, and there were so many things that were brought into it that it became confusing. One of the biggest things that was brought into the conversation was that data centers are now considered as critical infrastructure. And this whole definition came out and was published by DHS when the vaccines were starting to come out, so they could identify who should get the vaccines in a priority status. And believe it or not, in some scenarios, the data center entities were able to claim the priority one status because they maintained, managed, and operated data centers that were the back end core resource of a healthcare entity. Although they weren't presenting and actually working with the patient, all the patient data behind the scenes is either input into a data center or retained. And the same thing goes with the pipelines and the energy scenarios. As everything moves to the cloud and everything moves to co-location data centers, that the data center has started to become a piece of the critical infrastructure. So although the data centers themselves have not been regulated yet, unless you have federal data, it's actually the company. So for example, if you're an energy company, even though you have your data or your applications up in a data center, it would be the company, the energy company, that's regulated right now, or there are executive orders that are directed towards you in order to secure the environment. I believe that with CISA and DHS, that we are going to see the data centers themselves be more heavily regulated come not too distant future.
Wow. So let's talk about one other item before we kind of land the plane, if you will.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about cyber insurance. I know cyber insurance is a big topic right now due to massive increases in premiums, and I know that's all. Maybe just a little bit of clarity around that. I know it's always been a little confusing to me personally in terms of how that works. Who's the insured and exactly what's being provided by the insurance companies.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great but big right turn here that we're taking in talking about insurance, and it is a trend. Yes, you're absolutely correct. Again, you've done your homework, Dane. The insurance premiums have gone up, and that's predominantly as a result of ransomware type of situations. And unfortunately, the insurance companies have kind of created that situation themselves, because they actually have been paying the ransomware attackers in order to get the data back, or at least get an encryption key to get the data back. So, you kind of create that mess, if you will, by saying, hey, the attacker is going to do the bad thing. The people who are doing the right thing, the insurance people, the company that's been attacked, are okay, I'll pay you the ransom. And so the ransomware people go, well, I'm going to do that again if they're going to pay me. So that's where it's gone. And as a result, the insurance premiums have gone up. But another thing that's gone up as a result of that is that the insurance companies are being much more regulatory or scrutinizing the people or the organizations that they insure. So the way this works is that cyber insurance is not your typical insurance. It is not a rider. It's a specialized piece of insurance. So you cannot assume that cyber insurance is covered under your liability insurance or your E&O or other types of insurances like that. You need to go and get that specific insurance for cyber insurance. And during that process, what will happen is you'll make an application, and then the cyber insurance companies will do some security testing in your environment. They'll ask for documentation, they'll review your audits, and they'll ask for you to attest through a questionnaire the security controls you have in place. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one is they're identifying what they expect as a baseline security set for you to have in place. So for example, they'll ask, do you have antivirus in place that will detect malware, that will detect ransomware? Do you have an intrusion protection system in place? Do you have a log system in place where you can manage, maintain, and store those logs in a protected zone so we can do forensics on that later on? They'll ask questions like that because they first of all, they want those things to be in place, but second of all, they want to be able to do some sort of recovery of their own on the backside of that because they are reinsured. But anyway, we go through that process and we're finally granted cyber insurance. And then what will happen on the backside of that is if we get attacked, we can, well, the nice thing is that we can utilize the resources of the insurance company because they're going to want to protect their own investment, if you will. So if we get attacked and we need forensics, for example, I don't have to necessarily call an independent forensics agent anymore. I can call my insurance company, say, this is what's going on. I can get legal resources from them. I can get the forensics from them, and so on and so forth.
That's certainly sobering, but also comforting to know you're on our side.
Well, I hope so. And I'm definitely on the DataBank's side. I'm on the side of our customers, and I think together we are a winning team. So let's go out there and let's hit that home run.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thanks to our listeners. We encourage you to click the like and subscribe buttons to our YouTube channel, where you can always get the latest information on data security and compliance from us here at DataBank on the CISO Corner. And until next time, as always, be safe and stay secure.